Robert had been cleaning the floors of Riverside Academy for 5 years now. Every night he walked through those shiny hallways with his mop and bucket, making sure everything looked perfect for the next day. The school was fancy, the kind of place where rich families sent their kids to get the best education money could buy. Robert knew he was just part of the background here, invisible to most people who passed by during the day. But Robert had a secret. He wasn't always a janitor. 10 years ago, he used to be a music teacher at a good school across town. He loved teaching kids how to play piano, watching their faces light up when they finally got a difficult piece right. Music was his whole life back then. But then things fell apart. His marriage ended badly, and his ex-wife had expensive lawyers who made him look like a terrible person in court. He lost his daughter, his house, and somehow his reputation got destroyed too. People stopped calling him for teaching jobs. He felt like a failure, so he just gave up on that old life and took whatever work he could find. The one thing that kept him going was the grand piano in the school's concert hall. Every night at 11 o'clock, after all the students and teachers went home, Robert would sit at that beautiful instrument and play. Nobody knew about this. He wasn't supposed to touch it, really, but he couldn't help himself. Those 30 minutes of playing were the only time he felt like himself anymore. He would play classical pieces, jazz, sometimes songs he made up on the spot. The music filled the empty hall and made him remember who he used to be. One cold October night, Robert was playing a piece by Chopin. His fingers moved across the keys and he had his eyes closed, lost in the melody. Suddenly, he heard a small sound behind him. His hands stopped mid-note and his heart jumped. He turned around quickly, afraid it might be a security guard who would report him. Instead, he saw a young boy standing in the doorway. The kid looked about 12 years old, wearing the school uniform. He was holding a white cane, the kind blind people use to walk around. Robert recognized him right away. This was Thomas Riverside, the son of the man who owned the school. Everyone knew about Thomas. His father, Mr. Riverside, was a tech billionaire who had named the academy after his family. The boy's mother had passed away a few years ago, and people said Mr. Riverside threw himself into work after that, hardly spending time with his son. "Please don't stop playing," Thomas said softly. His voice was polite but had a loneliness to it that Robert recognized. "I've been listening to you every night for the past month. You play so beautifully." Robert stood up from the piano bench, nervous. "You've been listening? But how did you—" "I stay late most nights," Thomas explained, taking a few careful steps into the room with his cane. "My father's driver picks me up around midnight because Dad works so late. I have special classes during the day, but after they end, I just sit in the library mostly. Then a month ago, I heard someone playing piano and I started coming here instead. I sit outside in the hallway and listen." Robert felt his throat tighten. This kid had been sitting alone in a dark hallway just to hear him play. "Why didn't you come in before?" he asked. Thomas smiled a little. "I didn't want you to stop. I thought if you knew someone was listening, you might get scared and never play again. But tonight, I couldn't help it. That piece you were playing, it made me see colors in my head, blue and silver, like moonlight on water."
"Is that crazy?"
"No," Robert said quietly. "That's not crazy at all. That's what music is supposed to do." Thomas moved closer to the piano, his hand reaching out until he touched its smooth surface. "I take piano lessons twice a week with Professor Donaldson. He's supposed to be really good, famous or whatever. But I'm terrible at it. He keeps saying I don't have natural talent, that I'm too slow at learning. My father pays him a lot of money, but I still can't play anything that sounds nice." Robert watched the boy's face and saw the sadness there. He knew that look. He'd seen it on so many students over the years, kids who were told they weren't good enough. "Can I ask you something, Thomas? Do you want to learn piano, or does your father want you to learn?" Thomas thought about this for a moment. "At first, it was my dad's idea. He said my mom loved music, so I should learn. But now, after hearing you play, I really want to learn. I want to make sounds like that, sounds that feel like colors and emotions, but I don't think I can." "That's where you're wrong," Robert heard himself saying. "I can tell just by listening to you talk that you understand music in your heart. Your teacher might not know how to teach someone who's blind. It's different. You need someone who understands how to help you feel the music, not just see it on sheet music." Thomas's face lit up with hope. Do you think you could teach me? Just a little bit?" Every alarm bell in Robert's head went off at once. This was the owner's son, He was a janitor, not supposed to be playing the piano in the first place, definitely not supposed to be teaching students. If anyone found out, he would lose his job immediately. Mr. Riverside was one of the most powerful men in the city, and he was very protective of his son. This could go very wrong very fast. But looking at Thomas's face, seeing that spark of hope and excitement, Robert couldn't bring himself to say no. This boy reminded him why he became a teacher in the first place. Not for money or prestige, but for moments like this when a kid believes they can do something beautiful. Okay, Robert said, making a decision that would change both their lives. Tomorrow night, same time. 11 o'clock. But Thomas, you can't tell anyone. Not your father, not your teacher, not the other staff, nobody. Can you promise me that? Thomas nodded eagerly. I promise. I won't tell anyone. Thank you so much, Mr. Just call me Robert. Thank you, Robert. You have no idea how much this means to me. After Thomas left, Robert sat back down at the piano, his hands shaking slightly. What had he just agreed to? He could lose everything, but then again, what did he really have to lose? He was already at the bottom, cleaning floors for minimum wage, living alone in a tiny apartment. Maybe this was his chance to do something that mattered again, even if nobody ever knew about it. He played one more piece before locking up for the night, and for the first time in years he felt something like purpose stirring in his chest. Tomorrow night he would start teaching again. It would be secret, risky, and probably foolish. But some things were worth the risk. As he walked out of the building into the cool night air, Robert didn't know that this decision would lead to the biggest shock of his life. He had no idea that in a few months Thomas's father would discover their secret lessons or what would happen after that. All he knew was that tomorrow he would teach a blind boy how to make music that looked like colors. And somehow, that felt like the most important thing he'd done in a very long time. The next night, Robert finished his cleaning duties faster than ever before. He mopped the floors, emptied the trash bins, and wiped down the windows, all while watching the clock. By 10:30 he was done with everything. His heart was beating fast as he made his way to the concert hall. Part of him wondered if Thomas would actually show up, or if the boy had changed his mind during the day. But at exactly 11 o'clock he heard the familiar tap of a cane in the hallway. Thomas walked into the room with a huge smile on his face. "I've been thinking about this all day," the boy said excitedly. "I could barely focus on my regular classes." Robert couldn't help but smile too. "Well then, let's not waste any time. Come sit next to me." That first lesson was magical. Robert started with the basics, but not the way most teachers do. He didn't talk about notes on a page or finger numbers. Instead, he took Thomas's hands and placed them on the keys. "Feel this," he said, pressing down on middle C. "This is home base. No matter where you go on the piano, you can always come back here. Feel the position, remember how your arm feels at this angle." Thomas nodded, his fingers exploring the keys carefully. Robert taught him how to find his place on the piano using touch and position instead of sight. He showed him how the black keys came in groups of 2 and 3, creating a pattern that repeated across the keyboard. "These black keys are like landmarks," Robert explained. "They help you know exactly where you are, even without looking." Within an hour, Thomas was playing a simple melody with both hands. It wasn't perfect, but it was music. Real music that the boy had created with his own fingers. When he finished, Thomas had tears running down his face. "I did it," he whispered. "I actually made music." Robert felt a lump in his throat. This was why he became a teacher. This exact moment when a student realizes they can do something they thought was impossible. After that night, they met every evening at 11 o'clock. Robert would rush through his cleaning work and Thomas would wait in the library until it was time. The boy practiced on an electric keyboard at home with headphones so nobody would hear. His father never asked what he was doing. Mr. Riverside came home late most nights, checked on Thomas briefly, and then went to his home office to work some more. The house staff just assumed the boy was playing video games or using some app designed for blind kids. Week after week, Thomas got better and better. Robert was amazed at how quickly the boy learned. It turned out that Professor Donaldson was completely wrong. Thomas had incredible natural talent. His blindness actually helped him in some ways. He could focus entirely on the feel and sound of the music without getting distracted by sheet music or hand positions on a page. He played from his heart and it showed. Robert started teaching him more difficult pieces. He would play a section, then have Thomas repeat it by ear. The boy's memory was incredible. He could hear something once or twice and play it back almost perfectly. They worked on classical music, jazz, and even some modern songs that Thomas liked. During their lessons, they talked about everything. Thomas told Robert about his mom, how she used to sing to him before bed, how much he missed her. Robert talked about his own daughter, who he hadn't seen in years, and how teaching Thomas was healing something broken inside him. 3 months passed like this. Thomas became more confident, not just at piano but in everything. He smiled more, talked more, seemed happier. At home, he would hum melodies while doing homework. The house staff noticed the change but didn't think much of it. Kids go through phases, they figured, but Professor Donaldson noticed something was very wrong. The professor came twice a week to give Thomas his official piano lessons, and suddenly the boy was playing things that Donaldson hadn't taught him. Advanced techniques, proper finger positions, emotional expression that shouldn't be possible for someone at Thomas's supposed skill level. "Where did you learn this?" Donaldson asked one afternoon, suspicion heavy in his voice. Thomas had just played through a complicated section perfectly, something they'd never covered in their lessons. "I've been practicing a lot," Thomas said, trying to sound casual. "I watch tutorial videos online." Donaldson frowned. "You watch videos?" "Thomas, you're blind. How exactly do you watch piano tutorial videos?" Thomas felt his face get hot. "I mean, I listen to them. There are videos with detailed audio explanations for blind people." The professor wasn't buying it. He'd been teaching for 30 years, and he knew when a student was lying. Someone else was teaching this boy, someone good, but who? Thomas had no other teachers, no other lessons scheduled. The professor decided he needed to find out what was going on. The following week, Donaldson did something he'd never done before. After his lesson with Thomas ended at 8 in the evening, he didn't leave the building. Instead, he hid in an empty classroom down the hall from the concert hall. He brought a book and a thermos of coffee, prepared to wait as long as necessary. Hours passed. The building got quiet as staff members went home. The lights in most hallways were turned off. Donaldson was starting to think this was a waste of time when he heard something. Music. Beautiful, complex piano music coming from the concert hall. He checked his watch. It was exactly 11 o'clock. Moving quietly, Donaldson crept down the hallway toward the sound. He stayed in the shadows and peeked around the doorway into the concert hall. What he saw made his blood boil. There was Thomas sitting at the grand piano with the janitor beside him. The janitor was teaching his student, demonstrating techniques, giving instructions. Donaldson watched for a few minutes, his anger growing with each passing second. This was completely inappropriate. A janitor, someone with no credentials that Donaldson knew of, was secretly teaching his student. This was a violation of protocol, possibly even dangerous. The man was meeting alone with a 12-year-old boy late at night without permission from the parents. It didn't matter that the lesson looked innocent. This was wrong on every level. The professor had seen enough. He pulled out his phone and walked back down the hallway to make a call. He dialed a number he'd only used a few times before. Mr. Riverside answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and businesslike even at this late hour. "Professor Donaldson, is something wrong with Thomas?" "Mr. Riverside, I'm at the academy right now, and there's something you need to see immediately. It's about your son. I think he might be in a dangerous situation." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What kind of situation? Is Thomas hurt?" "He's not hurt, but please, sir, you need to come to the school right away. I'm not comfortable explaining this over the phone. Just trust me. This is urgent." Donaldson could hear the concern in Mr. Riverside's voice when he replied, "I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The professor ended the call and waited near the entrance of the building. He felt completely justified in what he was doing. Yes, Thomas seemed happy and was playing better than ever, but that didn't matter. Rules existed for a reason. Children needed to be protected. Parents had the right to know who was spending time with their kids. This janitor had crossed a serious line, and whatever happened next, he deserved it. Inside the concert hall, Robert and Thomas had no idea what was coming. They were working on a new piece, laughing together when Thomas hit a wrong note. The boy was relaxed and joyful, more alive than he'd been in years. Robert felt the same way. These lessons had given him back his purpose, reminded him that he was more than just a failed teacher turned janitor. "You're getting so good at this," Robert said proudly. "In a few more months, you'll be better than me." Thomas grinned. I doubt that. But Robert, I want to thank you. You've changed my life. I actually look forward to every day now because I know I'll get to play music at night. You've changed my life too, kid. More than you know. Neither of them heard the footsteps in the hallway. Neither of them knew that in less than 5 minutes Mr. Riverside would walk through that door, and everything would fall apart. They just kept playing. Two people who had found friendship and purpose in secret piano lessons, completely unaware that their world was about to come crashing down around them. The next few minutes would change everything, and not in any way that Robert could have imagined. Mr. Riverside's car pulled up to the academy in record time. He'd been working late at his office downtown when Professor Donaldson called, and the urgency in the professor's voice had sent his mind racing. His son was his whole world, even if he didn't always show it well. The thought that Thomas might be in some kind of danger made his hands shake as he parked the car. Professor Donaldson was waiting at the entrance, his face serious. Thank you for coming so quickly, Mr. Riverside. I know this is alarming, but I felt you needed to see this with your own eyes. See what exactly? Mr. Riverside demanded. Where's Thomas? What's going on? Follow me, please, and try to be quiet. They walked through the dark hallways, their footsteps echoing off the walls. As they got closer to the concert hall, Mr. Riverside could hear piano music. Beautiful music, the kind his late wife used to love. His chest tightened at the memory. Then he heard voices, someone giving gentle instructions, and his son laughing. Actually laughing, a sound he hadn't heard much lately. Donaldson stopped at the doorway and gestured for Mr. Riverside to look inside. What he saw made his entire body go rigid. Thomas was sitting at the grand piano with the janitor, a man he'd seen pushing a mop around the building but never really noticed. They were sitting close together, working on a piece of music, completely absorbed in what they were doing. Mr. Riverside's mind went into protective father mode immediately. This man, this employee he knew nothing about, had been meeting secretly with his 12-year-old son. Late at night, alone, without permission, without any supervision. Every worst-case scenario flashed through his mind at once. He didn't wait another second. He walked into the concert hall, his shoes clicking loudly on the polished floor. Thomas, step away from that man right now. The music stopped instantly. Thomas's head turned toward his father's voice, and the happy expression on his face disappeared, replaced by fear. Robert stood up from the piano bench so fast he almost knocked it over. His face had gone pale. Father, please, this isn't what you think, Thomas started to say. I know exactly what this is. Mr. Riverside cut him off, his voice cold and hard. This man has been secretly meeting with my son, a minor, late at night without my knowledge or permission. Do you have any idea how serious this is? Robert tried to find his voice. Sir, I can explain. Thomas asked me to teach him piano. You were just what? Meeting alone with a 12-year-old boy behind his parents' back? Do you realize I could have you arrested right now? What you've done is completely inappropriate and possibly illegal. Thomas grabbed Robert's sleeve, his white cane dropping to the floor. No, Father, you don't understand. Robert didn't do anything wrong. I begged him to teach me. He's been helping me, that's all. Mr. Riverside felt his anger rise even higher. This janitor had somehow gotten his son to defend him, to keep secrets from his own father. Thomas, we're leaving now. Professor Donaldson stepped into the room looking satisfied. Mr. Riverside, I've been teaching Thomas for 2 years with very limited progress. This man has completely undermined my professional methods. Who knows what kind of damage he's done? Play something, Thomas, Robert said quietly, interrupting the professor. His voice was calm despite his shaking hands. Show your father what you've learned. We're not doing this, Mr. Riverside said firmly. Thomas, I said we're leaving. But Thomas had already turned back to the piano. His hands found the keys with confidence, and before his father could stop him, he started to play. The piece was complex and beautiful, something called Moonlight Sonata that his mother used to listen to on Sunday mornings. Thomas played it with feeling and skill that seemed impossible for a boy who supposedly struggled with basic scales. Mr. Riverside stood frozen. This couldn't be his son playing. Thomas had been taking lessons for 2 years with minimal progress. Professor Donaldson had repeatedly told him that the boy had limited musical ability, that they needed to lower their expectations. But what he was hearing right now, this was the playing of someone truly talented, someone who understood music deep in their soul. The notes filled the concert hall with such emotion that Mr. Riverside felt something crack inside his chest. He hadn't listened to this piece since his wife died. She had loved it so much. And now here was his son, playing it beautifully, expressing feelings through music that he rarely showed in words. Tears started forming in Mr. Riverside's eyes, and he didn't try to stop them. When Thomas finished, the room fell completely silent. Even Professor Donaldson looked shocked, his face pale and confused. Thomas sat with his hand still on the keys, waiting for his father to say something. "How long has this been going on?" Mr. Riverside finally asked, his voice quieter now but still tense. 3 months, Thomas answered honestly. "Father, please don't be mad at Robert. I heard him playing one night and I needed this. After Mom died, everything felt dark and empty. But when I heard Robert play, it was like seeing light for the first time. He gave me something to look forward to, something that makes me feel alive." Those words hit Mr. Riverside harder than anything else that night. His son had been struggling, had been in pain, and he hadn't even noticed. He'd been so buried in his work, so focused on avoiding his own grief that he'd completely missed what Thomas was going through. He looked at Robert, really looked at him for the first time. The janitor wasn't some creepy predator. He was just a middle-aged man who looked tired and scared, someone who clearly loved teaching. "Who are you?" Mr. Riverside asked. "How do you know how to teach like this?" Robert swallowed hard. "I used to be a music teacher, sir, before my life fell apart. I taught for 15 years at various schools. I lost everything in a divorce and ended up here cleaning floors. When Thomas asked me to teach him, I knew I shouldn't. I knew it could cost me my job. But I couldn't say no to a kid who just wanted to learn." Mr. Riverside processed this information, his mind working through everything. He looked at the piano, at his son's hopeful face, at Professor Donaldson standing there with his mouth tight in disapproval. A decision was forming in his mind, but he wasn't ready to share it yet. "Professor Donaldson, thank you for bringing this to my attention. You can go home now. I'll handle this situation personally." The professor looked surprised. "But Mr. Riverside, surely you're going to call the police or at least security." "I said I'll handle it. Please leave." Donaldson left reluctantly, clearly unhappy that he wouldn't get to see whatever punishment was coming. Once he was gone, Mr. Riverside turned back to Robert and Thomas. The janitor was still standing there looking like he expected the worst. "Robert, is it?" Mr. Riverside said. "Go home. Don't come back to work until you hear from my lawyer. We're going to need to sort out the legal complications of what's happened here." Robert nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand, sir. For what it's worth, I never meant any harm. Thomas is a special kid with real talent. I just wanted to help him see that." "I know," Mr. Riverside said quietly. "That's why I'm not calling the police. But there are still procedures that need to be followed. You'll hear from me in a few days." Thomas wanted to argue, to beg his father not to punish Robert, but something in his father's tone made him stay quiet. Mr. Riverside put his hand on his son's shoulder and guided him toward the door. Thomas grabbed his cane from where it had fallen and they walked out together. In the car on the way home, Thomas sat silently, tears running down his face. Mr. Riverside drove with his mind spinning. He wasn't angry anymore, not really. He was confused, worried, and strangely grateful all at once. This janitor had seen something in his son that he'd missed. Had given Thomas something precious that all the expensive teachers and therapists hadn't managed to provide. The question now was, what to do about it? Mr. Riverside had built his entire empire on making smart decisions, on seeing opportunities that others missed. And as he drove through the empty streets with his crying son beside him, he realized this might be the most important decision he'd ever have to make. What happened next would surprise everyone. Most of all Robert, who went home that night convinced his life was about to get even worse. Robert didn't sleep at all that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling of his tiny apartment, replaying everything that had happened. By morning, he was convinced he'd not only lost his job, but might actually face legal trouble. Mr. Riverside was one of the most powerful men in the state. If he wanted to make Robert's life difficult, he could do it easily. 3 days passed with no word from anyone. Robert stayed in his apartment, jumping every time his phone buzzed. He couldn't eat much. His mind kept going back to Thomas, wondering if the boy was okay, if his father had punished him. The guilt was eating Robert alive. He'd put that kid in a terrible position, cause problems between a father and son. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe he should have just said no from the beginning. What Robert didn't know was that Mr. Riverside hadn't been sitting idle during those 3 days. The billionaire was doing what he did best, gathering information. He'd built his tech empire by making smart decisions based on thorough research, and he approached the situation the same way. First, he hired a private investigation firm, one of the best in the country. He gave them Robert's full name and told them he wanted to know everything. The investigators worked fast. Within 48 hours, Mr. Riverside had a complete report sitting on his desk. What he read surprised him. Robert Chen had been one of the most respected music teachers in Boston 15 years ago. He'd worked at prestigious schools, taught private lessons to wealthy families, even performed professionally at concert halls. Parents had wait lists to get their kids into his classes. Former students praised him online, talking about how he'd changed their lives and helped them discover their love for music. Then came the divorce. Robert's ex-wife came from old money, the kind of family with connections everywhere. When their marriage fell apart, she'd hired a team of expensive lawyers. According to the court documents, she'd painted Robert as unstable and irresponsible, though the investigators noted there was never any actual evidence presented. No criminal charges, no proof of wrongdoing, just implications and carefully worded statements that destroyed his reputation without directly accusing him of anything specific. Robert hadn't fought back. He'd signed away everything, the house, most of his savings, even regular access to his daughter. It was like he'd just given up. After the divorce was finalized, he disappeared from the Boston music scene completely. The investigators tracked him moving from city to city, taking whatever jobs he could find, until he eventually ended up working as a janitor at Riverside Academy. Mr. Riverside read through everything twice. This wasn't the story of a dangerous person. This was the story of someone who'd been broken by circumstances and had given up on himself. The man had lost everything that mattered to him, yet he'd still taken the risk to teach Thomas. Not for money, since he'd done it for free. Not for recognition, since it was completely secret. He'd done it simply because a lonely kid had asked him for help. The next thing Mr. Riverside did was review the security footage from the past 3 months. The academy had cameras in the hallways, though not inside the concert hall itself. He watched hours of footage, seeing Robert and Thomas arriving separately, meeting at the same time each night, leaving separately. Every interaction visible on camera showed nothing but appropriate behavior. Robert kept his distance, focused entirely on teaching. And Thomas, his son, looked happier in these recordings than Mr. Riverside had seen him in years. The final step was having Thomas evaluated by a specialist. Mr. Riverside brought in Dr. Patricia Wong, a renowned music therapist who worked with blind children. He didn't tell her about Robert, just asked her to assess Thomas's current skill level and teaching methods. Dr. Wong spent 3 hours with Thomas, testing his abilities, asking him to play various pieces, discussing his understanding of music theory. When she finished, she sat down with Mr. Riverside to share her findings. "Mr. Riverside, your son has extraordinary natural talent," she said, looking genuinely impressed. "But more than that, whoever has been teaching him understands exactly how to work with a blind student. The techniques Thomas has learned are sophisticated and specifically adapted to his needs. This isn't standard piano instruction. This is someone who really knows what they're doing." "What about Professor Donaldson?" Mr. Riverside asked. "He's been Thomas's official teacher for 2 years. Dr. Wong chose her words carefully. "Professor Donaldson is technically skilled, but he teaches the same way he'd teach a sighted student. He hasn't adapted his methods at all. Frankly, I'm surprised Thomas learned anything from him. The real teaching, the methods that actually helped your son, those came from somewhere else." Mr. Riverside thanked her and sat alone in his office for a long time after she left. He thought about his late wife, Helen, and how much she'd loved music. She used to play piano every evening, filling their home with beautiful sounds. After she died from cancer 3 years ago, he couldn't bear to hear music anymore. It hurt too much. He'd thrown himself into work, using his company as a way to avoid dealing with his grief. And while he'd been hiding from his pain, his son had been drowning in loneliness. Thomas had lost his mother too, but instead of getting support from his father, he'd gotten expensive therapists and teachers who didn't really understand him. The boy had been left to deal with his grief essentially alone. Then a janitor who played piano at night had given Thomas something no amount of money could buy. Someone who saw him as more than just the blind son of a rich man, someone who recognized his potential and took the time to nurture it. Robert had given Thomas purpose, joy, and confidence. He'd helped the boy connect with his late mother's memory through music in a way that felt healing instead of painful. Mr. Riverside realized something important. He'd been so focused on protecting Thomas, on controlling every aspect of his son's life to keep him safe, that he'd forgotten to actually connect with him. He'd hired the best professionals, bought the best equipment, enrolled him in the best schools. But he hadn't been present. He hadn't really seen his son at all. At home, Thomas had barely spoken since that night at the academy. He stayed in his room, refusing to practice on his keyboard, refusing to talk about what happened. The house staff was worried about him. When Mr. Riverside came home on the third evening, he went straight to Thomas's room and knocked on the door. "Can I come in?" Thomas didn't answer, but Mr. Riverside entered anyway. His son was lying on the bed facing the wall. "Thomas, we need to talk. Are you going to tell me Robert got arrested? Or that you're suing him?" Thomas's voice was bitter in a way Mr. Riverside had never heard before. "No, neither of those things. I've spent the last 3 days learning about Robert Chen. Did you know he used to be one of the best music teachers in Boston?" Thomas rolled over, surprised. "He was?" "Yes. He lost everything in a divorce and gave up on himself. But then he met you, and somehow you both helped each other." Mr. Riverside sat down on the edge of the bed. "Thomas, I owe you an apology. I've been so caught up in work, so busy avoiding my own pain about losing your mother, that I didn't see you were struggling too. I thought if I just hired the best people and gave you everything money could buy, that would be enough. But it wasn't, was it?" Thomas shook his head, tears starting to form in his sightless eyes. "I miss Mom every day, and I miss you too, even though you're right here. You're always working, always busy. Robert was the first person in a long time who actually spent time with me, who treated me like I was normal." "I know, son. And I'm sorry. I'm going to do better, I promise." Mr. Riverside took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something. Tomorrow, Robert is coming to my office. I've made a decision about what happens next, and I think you're going to be surprised." Thomas sat up quickly. "What kind of decision?" "You're not going to hurt him, are you?" "No, Thomas. I'm not going to hurt him. Trust me on this. What I'm planning, it's going to change things for all of us, but I think it's the right thing to do." That night, Mr. Riverside sent an email to Robert asking him to come to the office the next morning at 10. Robert read it a dozen times, his stomach in knots. This was it. Whatever was going to happen, he'd find out tomorrow. He didn't let himself hope for anything good. In his experience, things usually got worse before they got better, if they got better at all. But Mr. Riverside had something very different in mind, something that would shock not just Robert, but eventually the entire community. He'd made a decision that would change 3 lives forever, and tomorrow morning, the janitor who'd secretly taught piano to a blind boy would discover that sometimes taking a risk for the right reasons leads to the most unexpected rewards. The night of the recital finally arrived, and the auditorium was packed with parents dressed in expensive suits and designer dresses. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the polished grand piano sat center stage like a jewel under the spotlight. Everything about this place screamed wealth and privilege. Richard sat in the very last row, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He had come here tonight expecting a disaster. In his mind, he was already planning the conversation he would have with the headmaster about negligence and poor supervision. Next to him sat Mrs. Hartford, Daniel's expensive piano tutor, who kept adjusting her pearl necklace nervously. She too was preparing her defense, ready to explain how this performance was happening without her knowledge or approval. The headmaster kept glancing back at Richard every few minutes, loosening his tie like it was choking him. He knew exactly who was sitting in his auditorium, and he knew that man had enough money and influence to make or break the school's reputation with a single phone call. Meanwhile, Thomas stood near the back exit, half hidden behind the heavy curtain. He wore his janitor's uniform because that's what he was, after all. Just the guy who mopped these floors and emptied the trash bins. He had no right to be anywhere else. His hands trembled slightly as he watched the stage, and he kept telling himself that no matter what happened tonight, he had done the right thing. Daniel deserved a chance to shine, even if it cost Thomas his job. One by one, students performed their pieces. Some played flawlessly, Others stumbled through their scales and sonatas. Parents clapped politely after each performance, checking their phones between acts. This was just another school event for most of them, something to attend before heading to dinner at an expensive restaurant. Then the announcer called Daniel's name. The murmuring in the audience grew louder. Everyone knew who Daniel was, the blind son of Richard Ashford, the tech billionaire whose face appeared on magazine covers. Many had heard whispers that the boy had no musical talent, that his father had spent a fortune on tutors with no results. Some people actually felt sorry for him, while others were simply curious to see how badly this might go. Daniel walked carefully onto the stage, one hand trailing along the wall until he found the piano bench. His steps were measured and cautious, but his head was held high. He wore a simple black suit that his father had bought him, and his unseeing eyes looked straight ahead with quiet determination. The auditorium fell completely silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like everyone is holding their breath at the same time. You could have heard a pin drop on that polished wooden floor. Daniel settled onto the bench and placed his hands gently on the keys. He sat there for a moment, not moving, just feeling the instrument beneath his fingers. Then slowly he began to play. The first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata drifted through the auditorium like whispers in the dark. Soft, gentle, almost fragile. But there was something else there too. Something that made people sit up straighter in their seats. The music wasn't just technically correct. It had soul. It had feeling. It had life. Daniel's fingers moved across the keys like they were telling a story about struggle and hope, about darkness and light, about being lost and finding your way home. Every note seemed to carry weight and meaning. He wasn't just playing music. He was pouring his heart out for everyone to hear. Richard's arms slowly uncrossed. He leaned forward in his seat, his eyes locked on his son. His mouth opened slightly like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Tears began forming in his eyes, and he made no attempt to wipe them away. They just rolled down his cheeks one after another, while his son played the most beautiful music he had ever heard. Mrs. Hartford's face had gone pale. Her expensive credentials and years of teaching suddenly felt meaningless. She realized in that moment that she had failed to see what this boy was truly capable of. She had looked at his blindness and decided he had limitations when really, the limitations were in her own teaching. The headmaster stopped fidgeting with his tie. He sat completely still, transfixed by the performance unfolding on his stage. Throughout the auditorium, parents stopped checking their phones. They stopped thinking about dinner reservations and business meetings. They simply listened. Some of them had tears in their eyes too, though they couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was the beauty of the music, or maybe it was something deeper. Maybe they were witnessing something rare and precious, a moment of pure human triumph. Thomas stood in the shadows, tears streaming down his weathered face. He watched Daniel play and remembered all those nights in the empty music room, all those hours of patient teaching, of encouraging a boy that everyone else had given up on. He had never wanted recognition or reward. Seeing Daniel succeed was more than enough. Even if he lost his job tomorrow, even if he never taught another student again, this moment made everything worthwhile. The music swelled and filled every corner of the concert hall. Daniel's hands moved with increasing confidence, dancing across the keys like they had always belonged there. The piece grew more intense, more passionate, building toward its emotional peak. Daniel's entire body swayed gently with the rhythm, completely lost in the music. Then came the final notes. Soft again, fading like a whisper goodbye. Daniel's hands lifted from the keys, and for a moment nobody moved. The silence returned, but this time it was different. This time it was the silence of awe. Then the auditorium exploded with applause. People jumped to their feet, clapping so hard their hands hurt. Parents who had been strangers moments ago turned to each other with wide smiles and tearful eyes. The standing ovation went on and on, waves of appreciation and respect washing over the stage. Daniel stood and bowed, a small smile on his face. He had done it. He had proved to everyone, but most importantly to himself, that he was capable of something extraordinary. But Richard wasn't clapping. He was already moving. He pushed past the other parents in his row, stumbling slightly in his hurry. People turned to look at him, wondering if he was angry, if he was about to cause a scene. Some even pulled out their phones, ready to record whatever happened next. Richard didn't head toward the stage where his son stood basking in applause. Instead, he walked straight to the back of the auditorium toward the janitor standing in the shadows. Thomas saw him coming and started to turn away, ready to disappear into the hallway where he belonged. "Wait," Richard called out, his voice breaking with emotion. "Please wait." Thomas stopped and turned around slowly. He expected anger, maybe even threats. He had prepared himself for this confrontation. But what happened next nobody could have predicted. Richard Ashford, one of the richest men in the country, a man who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions before breakfast, walked up to the janitor and extended his hand. But not just for a handshake. He pulled Thomas into a tight embrace, right there in front of everyone. He held on to him like a drowning man holding a lifeline, his shoulders shaking as he sobbed openly. "Thank you," Richard whispered, his voice choked with tears. "Thank you for seeing my son when I was too blind to see him myself." The people nearby stopped clapping and stared at this unexpected scene. Phones came out, cameras flashed. This moment would be all over social media by morning. Thomas stood there awkwardly, not quite knowing what to do. He gently patted Richard's back, the way you comfort someone who's hurting. He just needed someone to believe in him, Thomas said quietly. "That's all any of us really need." Richard pulled back, wiping his eyes with no shame at all. He looked at Thomas like he was seeing him for the first time, really seeing him. Not as a janitor or someone beneath his notice, but as the man who had given his son the greatest gift possible, the gift of confidence and purpose. On stage, Daniel stood listening to the applause, a huge smile spreading across his face. He couldn't see his father embracing his teacher in the back of the auditorium, but somehow in his heart he knew that everything was going to be different from this moment on, not just for him, but for all of them. And in that beautiful old concert hall with its crystal chandeliers and polished floors, 3 lives changed forever, not because of money or status or power, but because of something much simpler and much more valuable, because one person took the time to see potential in another, and because sometimes the people who change our lives are the ones we almost overlooked.